Our presenter today will be Gunjan Bagla he's the Managing Director of Amritt, Inc., which is a global business consulting firm headquartered in California. Today, Gunjan will be discussing why and how companies are employing global technology scouting and the top pitfalls that global scouts face and how to manage them. Gunjan has 25 years of global sourcing and marketing experience, and he's held numerous senior positions managing teams in China, Japan, India, and all of Asia. He's authored numerous articles, and he's recently released a new book, which is entitled Business in 21st Century India, published by Warner Hachette. And if you'd like more information on Gunjan and his company, you can visit their website at amritt.com. I just want to take a moment to point out that we have a poll up at our webinar right now. We'd invite everyone participating to just quickly give your answer to the poll question, which is what's your company's experience with global technology scouting? Before we begin, I do have a few quick housekeeping items to cover. Each of you should have received via email the details to log on to the webinar. For the best experience today, and you were probably prompted for this when you logged in, we highly recommend that you install the Adobe Connect add-in to your computer. If you're looking at the webinar inside of a web browser, then that means that you do not have that add-in installed. To install that add-in, you should see a phone icon in the upper toolbar of your browser screen. If you click on that, it will prompt you. It'll say connect to your computer, and you'll follow the steps to install the Adobe add-in. All right. Once we do conclude the program today, we will send each of you a link to an online evaluation form, and then when we do close down the webinar, a link will appear on your screen as well. We'll have a link to our evaluation form for today's session. When you complete that survey form, you will be given a link to where you can download a copy of today's slide presentation and also a recording of today's session that you can share with others. During today's session, you will have the opportunity to ask questions. We will pause a couple times, but you don't need to wait until we pause to ask your question. You can ask your question at any time by typing it into the webinar chat window that's labeled question and answer, and then your question will be announced into the call by our producer, Lisa Teuscher. Please remember that if you have the slides expanded to full screen, you will need to exit the full screen mode to access that Q&A window. All right, let us begin with today's session. Once again, our presenter is Gunjan Bagla, Managing Director of Amritt, Inc., and author of a new book, Doing Business in 21st Century India. Don't forget to give your answer to our poll question that's up on your screen right now, and I will turn the call right over to Gunjan.
Thank you so much, Greg and Lisa, and good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to each of you who has joined into this audio session and webinar today. We have a fairly eclectic group, and I will try and address my comments so that we make this interesting and interactive for each of you. I do encourage you to use the Q&A box to send in questions as we go along, and we will answer them either in the middle or towards the end of the session. So you can see, first thing we wanted to do was understand the composition of the audience. And it seems like at least half of you, or at least the sample of people who have answered the question, are new to scouting, and a smaller percentage have some experience in global scouting already. Can we close the poll, Lisa? Terrific. I want to start with a story. One of our clients approached us about 4 years ago, and they have a fairly diverse range of products and business units. This happens to be a company called Clorox. Some of you might be familiar with them. And what I'm telling you now is material that we presented. This slide is really a story about Clorox that we presented at another event about a year ago. Clorox has a policy now that they don't release a new product to market unless 60% of consumers are actually preferring the new product to their own legacy product as well as to the best-in-class competing product in the market. And this is most often used as a filter before they will launch a new product in the market. So they have a fairly high barrier before something makes it out of R&D and through product development all the way to the store shelves. They approached us some time ago, and I have to be a little bit vague about exactly what the initiative was, but they wanted to get ideas and companies and partners from a global footprint rather than just the U.S. or North America, which has typically been their forte. Working over a multi-month process, we identified 50 candidates for them and then narrowed it down to about 6 companies, organizations, and labs that we felt met their overall criteria. Now, what's different about when you do this for a global kind of situation, for those of you who are familiar with scouting, is that this is not really a database-oriented process. There's a lot of personal contact and really work in the field that is involved. We also go about checking the reputations of the various partners because their materials may look fine, but if their reputation isn't solid or they are not used to working with Western clients, then you want to be sure that we prep them appropriately and filter them out if we don't have the confidence that they will do a good job for a Western company. Most of our clients are Western, so I'm giving this from the perspective of an American or a European company. In phase 2 for Clorox, we actually took the Chief Innovation Officer and a small team of people from their open innovation group out into the emerging country target and visited most of the 6 shortlisted companies. You know, that might seem an obvious thing, but often getting to an overseas location and coordinating the time of senior management can be quite a challenge. The getting back and forth itself takes more time than it might if it were just in North America. But we felt that this was an important step for this company and for many of our clients. It's not something you always have to do, but in this particular case, it made absolute sense to do that. And you might think that that was the end of the scouting process, but what we found was that to become successful with the shortlist beyond the 6 and to take it forward, a tremendous amount of work needed to be done inside of the company. And that work involved talking to the specific R&D teams and figuring out where the best match would be, where the biggest gap between need and current status was, so that you could pick a project that could overcome the overheads of working with a remote partner halfway across the world. And I think it would be fair to say that there were some false starts that looked like something would come together, but then people on the inside had reservations, most often for very good reason. And we are a great believer in listening carefully to the skeptics so that we don't start a project that will then end up not delivering the kind of results that one might want. So this process, took frankly several months after the visit was done to be able to pick something that could be a pilot and could be launched. We picked something that was fairly low risk. It was something that wasn't going to get done unless the overseas partner did it. So we weren't really competing with the domestic R&D team in any manner. It was something that sales and marketing wanted done, but they just didn't have the bandwidth within the R&D team to assign people to do it. The objective was not really to save money, although definitely in the final analysis, the cost factor was very attractive. The real idea was to get something to market that would otherwise have never made it. And the process of working with the selected partner turned out to be very productive for this particular client within Clorox. The project was completed on time. And then the crucial test, as I mentioned earlier, came about, which is where they run the 60-40 consumer delight test. And frankly, all of us were a little concerned about that because we had a situation where the product development team at the offshore location was not directly exposed to Western consumers. And so the communication really had to be on paper, and it had to be fairly well documented as to what's the end goal that people are looking for and what are the parameters that might create this consumer delight. The results of this first pilot were very successful, and the product prototypes in many different categories actually met that consumer delight filter, and so it then went into the next phase of development. The good thing about finding this particular partner was that this was not the end of it. There are several other business units within Clorox that had initiatives in the months and years that have followed, and we were able to harmonize some of those with this particular development partner. Now, having had some experience in working with the overseas partner, both the client and ourselves as advisors to the client felt that we could take development risk. Yes, there's development risk for sure, but there's also a situation of market risk for some of the new initiatives that they expect to launch over the next 2 years. These could be breakthrough products that could create, very significant, and the entire development is being handled by the offshore partner. Again, these are initiatives that would not see the light of day if it were not for the existence of an overseas product development partner. So we are still not we are competing with internal R&D teams. We're really looking at the idea of increasing the overall revenue while would otherwise be expected. So this has been a terrific journey. It's gone on for a number of years, and the process will continue. We are broadening the range of partners, but I'm not really free to talk about that at this moment. Just wanted to give you a real live story on something that we've been working for a while. Let me give you a little bit of an agenda about what I'm going to talk about for the rest of the session. We'll talk a little bit about why we should go global, and then we'll talk about why global scouting is different. We'll spend some time talking about what is most fruitful in global scouting and give you some pointers about when it's not a good idea to go global. There's many situations where going global could be a real waste of time. It could be a sink in terms of resources, and we'd rather you not even start if that's going to be the case. There are many concerns and many worries that people have about global scouting. We'll ask you a poll question about some of your worries, and I'll tell you about some of the concerns that our clients have encountered. Throughout the presentation, I'm going to be using many of the words of a number of different clients. We've worked for dozens of companies, both in the United States, Canada, and in Europe. And so much of what you will be hearing are the words of our clients. Lisa, can we run poll question 4 now?
Yep, hold on 1 minute.
All right, so please take a moment to tell me why you are currently interested in global technology scouting. And clearly this list is not complete. Just give me the best match that you see here as your top reason why you're thinking about it today and why you're taking the time to attend this audio session. Let's wait another 30 seconds, Lisa, and then broadcast the results in case some people are having trouble with the poll. Let's go ahead and broadcast the results. Okay, so all of you should be able to see that the primary answer that those who replied to the poll have given is to build competitive advantage. What I'm struck by is that cost reduction seems to be important to less than 10% of the audience. And this is interesting because we've been talking to clients about global technology scouting, and 4 years ago I bet that the cost reduction answer would have been over 50%. And this is actually a good trend in my view, because global technology scouting offers you much more than just the idea about taking some money away from your budget and utilizing it differently. Building competitive advantage and this implies increasing revenue, is really a far more compelling reason to get the company excited about utilizing technology, IP, partnerships from other countries. And then, of course, the other reason happens to be to increase your capacity so that R&D can put more products to market than you can with your domestic team. So these are good reasons. Let's close the poll. Okay. So we asked our clients, and this is all fresh over the last couple of weeks, we asked a number of our clients about why they chose to go global, and here's some of the reasons they gave us. Many of our clients said that they were looking for broader access to ideas and resources, that their current R&D team was overloaded by projects that they were working in terms of legacy and breakthrough initiatives, and there are things that were outside the core that still needed to be done. Either they were long-term initiatives that the core R&D team didn't have time for, or they were things that they were important but not critical. And those are the ideal kinds of things in our client's view that should be candidates for global scouting, and what drove many of our clients to look at ideas and technologies and intellectual property from overseas. Several of our clients talked about competitive advantage as well. And what was interesting was that some of the threads were a little different from what we expected. Clearly, people were looking for new perspective and ideas. If things have been developed in a completely different market, perhaps you can bring them back and apply them to your European or your North American markets and gain some advantage. But also, we had some clients who really went to emerging countries for inspiration. They were looking for things that perhaps the common wisdom in the West said, well, you can never do this. Consumers will never buy this. Or, you'll never get this product through distribution. And then you go into another country or you go into another economy and you find that they are doing lots of that. Now, you can't simply transplant that idea and make it work without modifying it, but you can certainly bring it as an item for discussion within your R&D, marketing, and sales team and see how you can adapt it and make it work within your core markets. And we've had a number of cases where this has worked, but it was interesting to see that many clients thought that this was an important aspect of global technology scouting. People are certainly looking for leverage, and most often it's not like, can I save money? It's really, if I have a budget of X, how can I get the biggest bang for the buck? One of our European clients had a very interesting take on this, and this is something I hadn't really heard a lot in years past. And he felt that over the years that we worked with them, that his sense was that inventors in developing economies often don't appreciate the full value of what they have created. So you can have a very equitable discussion with them where they feel they're being very handsomely compensated for some kind of IP participation in Western markets while preserving their intellectual property rights, say for the domestic market, or sometimes they're willing to sell you global rights depending on your situation. But this particular client company felt that they were able to get very good deals by shopping for intellectual property and product ideas in developing economies. What we have found, in addition to this, is the very last bullet here, is that often you can get access to a team of developers who perhaps is not challenged in their own market. Perhaps the work that they are doing within their own footprint is interesting. It makes revenue for the company, but it does not stretch the intellectual capacity of the team. And so they are delighted to work with a Western company who has perhaps some needs that are slightly different or orthogonal or much more challenging, and so they can get a greater sense of fulfillment by working with the Western company. And for the Western company, it works out well because they get a fully functioning team that is highly capable and perhaps has some additional capacity. So we have a diagram here that shows on the x-axis the amount of money you would need to invest or the amount of time you would take to translate a global idea into the market. And the degree of innovation, however you might want to measure that, is represented on the y-axis. So the three green boxes are generally what would be described as scouting. You can license technology or IP from an existing entity, or you can go to a university in a country such as China, India, or another emerging country and sponsor a project with a professor or a group of graduate students. You can go to a national lab in some of these countries where they have developed ideas that haven't made their way to market or are capable of developing ideas for you. We recently undertook a project like that in the natural products area, and a client found a real good value in being able to work with an overseas national lab. The third green box, this one here, talks about collaboration with an existing product company where somebody, maybe a company similar to yours, except that they are not competing with you in your markets, and so they are happy to collaborate with you in some manner. Now we have two areas outside of this ellipse. This yellow one is primarily available from Indian companies, but there are companies in other markets as well that provide this, where they've really built a substantial organization to provide design for hire, if you will. And by substantial, I mean people who have tens of thousands of people working on a work for hire mode. So to me, that's not really scouting, but some ideas that may appear to be candidates for scouting better fit in this yellow box. And then some ideas that are appropriate for scouting may also fit in the upper right box with the arrow, and that's really having to do with your own company setting up an R&D center or a tech center in an emerging economy. Many, many companies have done that. I see the list of attendees today, and I know that some of you have development teams in emerging countries that might be serving the local markets, but are also now starting to serve markets outside of their local footprint, and sometimes Western markets as well. Okay, let's move on. So those of you who are familiar with the want, find, get, manage kind of model, this is really another representation of that. And when we are talking about planning here, the kinds of work that people might ask to do in global scouting has to do with landscape studies. So you might say, give me a sense of the types of players that are doing innovative things within my field or within a field that is orthogonal or adjacent to my field. And sometimes this is good if you have the budget and you have some fairly broad goals. We still want to define it far more crisply than I'm doing now for this to be a useful process. The next phase, searching, is typically what people associate with scouting. And this is what domestic scouting is often all about, where you conduct a search, often a database-oriented search, through some of the companies that are very good at that, to be able to bring out ideas or IP or technology or partners for you. Now, we do the same kind of thing globally, but there's a lot more personal contact involved. You can't always just turn to a database or do a Google search and find anything of substantial value. The most interesting ideas and the most interesting partnerships have come about through the utilization of personal, professional, social networks, if you will. And then you have to go through some kind of vetting process to pick the right companies out of that. Now, often people think that scouting should end there, but in the space of global technology scouting, we generally find that it is valuable to involve the scouting entity, somebody such as Amritt or whoever you're using, to be able to continue through the process of the get phase with the negotiations, the discussions, finding some kind of a solution where the partner in an emerging country gets some value, and often you're able to find value beyond money for them. And that becomes like a great benefit for both sides because it doesn't tax your budget as much as other things would. So this is something that is well worth looking for. And you'll find that for the most successful long-term global relationships, that you want to have some sense of shared goals. You want to create a structure that allows new ideas and new initiatives to come through. This might seem obvious, except that when you're trying to do this with an entity in China or in India or Brazil or Eastern Europe, many times there are cross-cultural barriers that hold back both the Western side as much as the emerging country side, and things don't flow as smoothly as they could potentially. So for clients who are doing quite a bit of global technology scouting, we often run cross-cultural workshops. We take them in market. We try and anticipate the kinds of problems that people might face so that we can begin to address them proactively and be able to increase the pipeline of global technology scouting ideas. Now, I would encourage you to start sending questions on anything that I'm talking about. And if I see enough questions coming in, we'll take a break before continuing to the next slide. Again, we turned to our clients to ask them what's the difference between scouting globally versus scouting within the United States or within your home country. And these are also answers reflected mostly from our clients who have engaged us over the last 6 or 7 years. And so people said that the mechanism of finding the most innovative individuals and organizations does not appear to work the same way. And often there's somebody who's innovative but is not really very talkative, and so you have to go through a trusted channel, and you have to be able to provide good reason why they should share information with a company half a world away, and be able to talk freely without risking some of their intellectual property. So we've got to be really careful when we approach organizations in other economies, because they don't necessarily have the same economic systems, the same legal systems, and they resort to other mechanisms to protect their competitive advantage. A couple of our clients who have used our services for quite a number of years wanted me to point out that getting an idea from a global entity and then bringing it to work within the US, Canada, or Europe often requires some degree of translation. You can't simply take the idea as the open innovation team and go straight to your R&D or marketing folks and have the same kind of reception that you might expect from a local idea. And so it's very important, they felt, that I mentioned that some degree of translation, some degree of adaptation, some degree of preparedness perhaps, you might call it, is really required before you can translate these ideas into something that your internal development and marketing teams see as actionable. If you go back to my very first few minutes when I talked about the internal selling and some of the false starts that we had, it would be, I think, by using this translation step, we could limit the number of false starts dramatically by being able to prepare the ideas. Think of this as kind of a middle step before engaging your marketing or product development team. And this is a step that the OI team, the open innovation or scouting team inside the company, needs to perform. Likewise, our clients felt that the get phase of the want, find, get, manage model requires some adaptation. Much of this has to do with cross-cultural communication. If you're working with a company, if you're a California entity working with another California entity, you ask a question, they answer yes or no, and you can generally take that answer at face value. Those of you who have worked with Asian economies know that you can almost never take anything at face value. If you ask a direct question, it's very unlikely that you will get a direct answer. And this just has to do with the way that people in emerging countries and their societies work. They often consider direct communication to be too blunt, almost too rude, perhaps even too obnoxious. So they will try to be subtle about what they say. And sometimes the value of what they are trying to say gets lost in the subtlety. So it's very important when you have a conversation with a global partner that you truly understand what's going on in their heads, and there's a multi-stage process to be able to do that, to be able to appeal not only to their visible expectations, but also to their unspoken expectations. This is one of the key places where we find that global relationships falter. We are often called in, this is not the kind of engagement we like to do, but we are often called in when a relationship is malfunctioning. And I can tell you that at least half of the time when we find that a new relationship is malfunctioning, it has to do with ineffective cross-cultural communication on one or both sides of the global partnership. And it's something that if you practice the right methods, you can prevent this kind of pain from happening, and you can engage in a far more productive relationship. The get phase also involves some degree of understanding about the validation and transfer of intellectual property. It's not always the same. You can't expect that a contract or an agreement that you send over from the US will be readily understood by the party in China or India or other location. The relative meaning of confidentiality can be very different. I remember personally I was on a trip on behalf of a client, and we were shown things in one particular emerging country, and I won't name it, that should probably have not been shown to us because they were the private property of one of their partners. I don't believe that the emerging country partner had any malice or any bad thoughts about showing it to us. They just weren't, they hadn't been explained the meaning of confidentiality and the meaning of what they should and should not share. They wanted to show off their capabilities. There was a very easy way for them to do that without letting me know who it is that they work for or what exactly they did. And these are things that we are very careful in guiding our clients to be ready for and to take some time. And this is the part I'll get into, the hidden costs of global scouting, and this is certainly one of those. Before you embark on a global scouting project, you should also check within your own company what the perceptions are of IP and ideas that may emerge from various geographies. In a couple of cases, we found some excellent ideas that the OI team wanted to take forward, but there were some beliefs within the company that essentially held back ideas. In this particular case I'm thinking of most recently were good ideas from two Chinese organizations that the organization at the upper management level was just not ready to take forward at this stage. It's not that they thought the ideas were bad, but they just weren't ready for them at this point in time. And we would have been much better off focusing our energies elsewhere had we known that there would have been a dead end going forward. So we do want you to have a little bit of an understanding going ahead if there are some obstacles that are going to be present. Some of the other factors relating to global scouting may seem obvious when stated, but I cannot tell you how many times these become barriers to a productive relationship. You're not going to get on a plane every now and then to fly to Shanghai or Rio de Janeiro or Bangalore to be able to resolve or communicate ideas. And so you want to find other ways to substitute for face-to-face contact. In a major project, you do want some face-to-face contact, but there's other means that you can compensate for that, and phone calls alone are not usually sufficient. Remember also that if you're on the East Coast and you want to work with China, there's about a 12-hour difference. If you want to work with India, there's a 9.5-hour or 10.5-hour difference depending on whether you're in winter or summer. And this means that you will often need to take calls either early in the morning or late in the afternoon or early evening your time. You might want to start your workday sometimes on Sunday evening. And many people aren't quite ready for that. There are ways around these issues, but it's something that you need to keep in mind, that synchronous communication requires some planning and requires some pain on both sides. I'll quickly go through a couple of case studies. Here was a company that was looking at the idea of frugal innovation. This was a few years ago when they were concerned that buying patterns within the United States were changing. And so they said, well, let's find out what the middle class in less developed economies is doing for product purchases and so on. And we came back with a list of almost a dozen ideas that could perhaps apply to their Western markets while also being able to reduce prices and simultaneously improve margins for the client. Quite a bit of field work. In this particular case, it happened to be we visited consumers, we visited retailers, we visited manufacturers, and brought back an idea about how, for our client team, how these 11 ideas were functioning in the market in India. And out of those 11, 2 seemed like they were perfectly appropriate to implement within the U.S. with a very limited number of changes, mostly in packaging and in one particular case in the size of the package. They were able to bring them into market fairly quickly. But the real value came a few weeks later after the first discussions happened, when somebody in one of the other emerging market economies for this particular client said, here's something that didn't appear to work in Europe and North America, but we can apply it in this particular case in Latin America. And this caused the rest of the emerging market team to look at this idea from India much more closely. And we were able to implement it fairly painlessly to be able to deliver a significant spike in sales in those emerging markets. And call it serendipity, if you will, but we had to be ready to accept such ideas for making reality out of them. Let me talk briefly about where we can find global ideas, and really the short answer, if you look at this slide, is everywhere. Today, most of our clients are looking at, there's a typo on this slide, but they're looking at China and India. We've also found very promising solutions, sometimes as close as Mexico. We recently completed a project where some of the best ideas came out of South Korean companies. We did work in the entertainment business in the past, where Ukraine and Vietnam and South Africa fared very well. Many of the channels that you will use are very similar to what you might find in the West. Universities, labs, companies, individuals, you name it. When you turn to countries such as China and India, in many cases it makes sense to look at the traditional knowledge. These are civilizations that are 5,000 years old and more, and sometimes there are solutions existing in that traditional knowledge that can then be converted to intellectual property and patentable ideas. And we often find very fertile ground there. I'll go quickly through this next case study. This was a medical device company that realized that their future lay in a much more focus on technology and product development. But part of what they wanted to do was move their product development functionality into an area adjacent to what they had been very good at in this particular case for 8 decades. And they found it was very challenging to be able to recruit scientists and chemists in the adjacent area, because they were just not known in the Midwest to have the career paths for these adjacent skills. And so what we did for them was identify talent at a number of Chinese and Indian universities and research labs where world-class work was going on in related areas. And then we helped them negotiate research partnerships with just a few of those entities that was then able to bring back ideas where they could apply this adjacent technology platform to their current products and make products that were far more competitive and gave them an edge in today's marketplace. Now, medical device being what it is, some of these products are still making their way to the marketplace. The first of them has actually hit the market earlier this year, and others are expected to go through the regulatory process, I would say, over the next 18 to 24 months. But it's been a very successful experience for our client. Um, can we run the next poll, Lisa? This would be question 3.
Okay, sorry, you said 1, 4, 2, 3. So.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. Here you go.
Okay, so I'd like to get a sense of what worries you most about global technology scouting. We'll close this poll fairly quickly so that we can move on to the rest of the presentation. So maybe another 10 seconds. Okay, gone. Lisa, can you broadcast the results? Okay, so we have a divided house here, I guess. Some people are concerned that there will be no value from this, and I think that's a fair concern. You want to approach this very, very thoughtfully. Some people are concerned about intellectual property being compromised. I'll address that issue in a moment. And then there's always the worry that will this cause lesser empowerment for the domestic team or perhaps even cost reduction. In our experience in many years of doing this, we have found that there really haven't been any instances of our clients finding their domestic teams either losing power or certainly not reducing any jobs. But it's a valid concern that people feel early on. So let's close the poll. And we asked our clients, when do you think global scouting is not right? And one of the things that people said was that it's important to have clear goals when you're working domestically, but it's far more important to have very clear and crisp, not only technology goals, but business goals when you're going overseas. What are you really looking for? And what are you going to accomplish? Not just in the mechanics of the technology platform, but really in terms of what you expect this to do for your business. If the scout understands that, and if this can be translated as appropriate to the partners, you will get far better value out of global scouting than otherwise. So often we find that within our engagements, we spend a fair amount of time working through the goal defining process and making them really crisp and translatable to us, and then also ultimately to the potential partners that we might find in overseas markets. There are some situations with regulatory and quality issues where you might find that taking a whole product idea offshore might be too much. And in those cases, you want to really extract the part that can be parsed out, that is easier to translate and be able to have an offshore partner perform. I gave you the medical device example earlier, and I think in many medical device instances, you want to be very cautious before you do a complete product idea coming out from overseas, certainly from outside of Europe, North America, or Japan. There are instances where that has happened, but it's something that you have to watch for very carefully. And far more likely it is that you will succeed if you are able to parse out parts of the technology, as I explained earlier with our medical device example. Now, one other thing we've learned, and we've learned this the hard way. For any client that we have dealt with, there are some things that either informally or formally are considered sacred. This we shall never have anybody else do, either because we are so good at it or because it would be impossible for people inside to believe that someone else could be a contributor to this, or for whatever other reason. And we try and ferret this out to the extent possible. I cannot tell you the number of times we have been told that in our company there are no sacred cows. And in our company you can pretty much bring any idea, and if it's better than something internal, we will take it. Pragmatically speaking, for virtually all of our clients, we have found that there are limits to what people will consider from the outside. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not saying this as a criticism. I'm just saying that let's choose those ideas to look for overseas where you won't run into the sacred cow syndrome and then have to throw away a lot of work, and then everybody starts to think that global technology scouting is a bad idea. Let's focus our energies on places where we can together win. All right. So I asked our clients, what their worries and pitfalls were. And early on, most people, like the audience here, expressed the concern about intellectual property. Now, there's two angles to it. Most people are concerned, hey, will my IP be safe? If I'm going to interact with a company all the way in China or India or Eastern Europe, and I need to share something about what I have done at my company, will that information be safe? I think that's a valid concern, but in most cases, the vetting process weeds out those partners who cannot be trusted with this issue. But many people don't think about the reverse issue. Now, you are developing the IP, you are formalizing it, you are buying a license to it, whatever it is that you are doing from this overseas entity, which may be a national lab, which may be a company in that country, which may be a university. What you want to be sure and understand is what are the boundaries of what you are paying for and who else might have rights to some of what you just paid for. These things are often very crisp when you are dealing with North American and even European partners. But when you are looking at Asian or other emerging country partners, this is an area where, frankly, they just don't have enough experience in many cases. So it's not that, again, that they are being dishonest or they are being deceitful in any manner, but many of them have begun to experience these kinds of situations really since the founding of the World Trade Organization, which is about 15 years ago. And in the case of China, they joined the WTO in 1999, and things like this only began happening in the last 5 to 7 years. So I think it's incumbent upon the OI team to be able to understand that. The next thing you want to understand are the hidden costs. It's not just the money that you pay for the partner out there. You've got to consider the fees for the scout. You've got to consider travel expenses. You've got to consider things that the partner may have to spend that they didn't anticipate. And we always try to keep, some funds aside for that so that your economics doesn't get completely awry simply because the partner didn't anticipate something on your side. And again, this is often a matter of training and educating the partner. You will have a significant overhead in cross-cultural communication and in the potential for misunderstanding. Then there are ways to mitigate that, but in the early stages, there's no such thing as a perfect relationship. I can tell you that there are clients who've been working with for 4 or 5 years with the same partners offshore, and we still have issues around cross-cultural communication. So that's something that is important to keep in mind. I am often told by people who are part of OI teams or the R&D units that they support that there are individuals or folks that don't really want to get on a plane to fly to a strange country where they can't, maybe can't drink the water. And those are valid concerns. Again, I don't want to minimize them. You need to keep that in mind so that you choose your initiatives appropriately. We don't think there are any significant safety issues in traveling to most of the emerging countries. There are certainly certain countries where we wouldn't take our clients to, but we've never had an adverse incident in travel. And anything we've had is really more related to food and drink where people didn't take our specific advice. But it's generally considered, it's generally a very safe thing to do. But if someone doesn't want to travel, you don't want to push them towards a project that might require so. I would think that these are the major pitfalls that you need to be aware of. There are many others, of course, but if you can account for these, you'll be 90% of the way ahead compared to most people. So, in conclusion, I would say that scouting globally can be quite compelling. But if you approach global scouting assuming that it's going to be exactly the same as scouting within North America or Europe, you're going to have some disappointment. You want to select your projects and initiatives very carefully The good thing is that because the cost is often lower, you can initiate maybe 6 ideas, whereas you might only have been able to do 3 or 4 within the US or North or Europe. And then the idea of the possibility of producing a home run becomes much greater because you're able to make a larger number of bets. Now, our audience has been very shy today, Lisa, and we haven't had many questions come up. Let's open it up for questions at this stage.
Well, there's one here maybe you want to think about. Notwithstanding, this is from Derek, notwithstanding language and distance factors, do you find that starting a project with an Asia prospect can be a lot slower than in North America, European Union, and how do you plan or compensate for that?
Yeah, I think if you're talking about your first project, you should allow for some additional time, given the distance and given the uncertainty on both sides. Once things start, once you have a pipeline going, we actually find that projects can get going faster by using an overseas partner. At the micro level, they can go faster simply by leveraging the time difference. You can send something at the end of your day, and while you're sleeping, the team over there can be working on the idea or a response to your email or question, as long as you have phrased it correctly and completely, and they can respond to you by the time you come back in the morning. So that's one thing at the micro level. At the macro level, some of the partners have more capacity and are not so constrained to be able to devote resources to you. And therefore, you might find that they are more responsive to new ideas and new development mechanisms. We were working for a chemical company once, and we were looking to do several projects sponsored at one of the leading chemical engineering departments at a top university. And so the client had assumed that new projects could only start at the beginning of the next academic year. But this particular university was set up where they had a large backlog of PhD applicants, and they said if the project is significant enough, we can open it up to new graduate students and get started really any time of year. And this was a very pleasant surprise to our client because they were able to really advance their work by about 6 months. So these things are possible. I don't think these things should be major factors in the first 1 or 2 engagements. I think you should allow for extra time, Derek. Does that answer the question? I'm happy to take a follow-on if you want more clarification.
Okay, in the meantime, I have another question here from Rajiv. Retention has been a huge issue. How do you look at that metric? What are good numbers for guidance? And he goes further and clarifies, he's talking about retention of resources at the outsource vendor.
Okay, so the question is about retention at an outsourced vendor.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So let me clarify for the rest of the audience that most of what we have talked about is relating to work being done at the traditional scouting partners, which are not your typical outsourcer. Okay, I think Rajiv's question has to do with what I alluded to. Is it easy to go back in the slides, Lisa? Let's just go back to.
Yeah.
Okay. Oops.
Do you know what number you're looking for? I can do it for you.
I can tell you which number. Go back to slide. This would be slide 4, maybe 5 with the agenda. This one, yes. Forward one.
Oh, okay. There you go.
This one. Okay. So what Rajiv is asking about really is this yellow box here, where you are in a contractual relationship with a work-for-hire company that has typically thousands of engineers working for them. And in that environment, retention of employees, is often an issue. I consider this, as you see with the ellipse, it's a little bit outside the area of scouting. So with that provision, I want to go ahead and answer Rajiv's question. We find tremendous variation in the ability for work for hire companies to be able to maintain the loyalty of their employees. Some have much higher, three to four times higher retention rates than others. And generally in the product engineering, product development space, retention is far more important than, say, in the call center or IT outsourcing. So this is a very important measure to look for. I can say some of the largest outsourcers in countries such as India or China are probably not well suited to product development outsourcing for that very reason. We like to focus very often on mid-sized or smaller companies where the employees have a tighter relationship with management and have a lower turnover rate. But at the end of the day, it's not the overall retention rate at the company that matters. It's the mini team that is going to be working for you. And that's something that's often hard to evaluate, but it's something that a third-party advisor can bring you very specific advice and guidance. I won't name the company, but the one that's reputed to have the highest turnover rate, in other words, the lowest retention rate, does have many teams that have had zero turnover for years and years. And so it's just a matter of finding the right team within the company if they have the skills that would apply to your particular problem or situation. And they will want to be compensated for that on an appropriate basis. So you're very seldom is a low-cost provider the best solution for this situation, precisely because they don't have the retention rates that you would like. Lisa, are there other questions?
Yep, there's one more here. What percentage of your efforts are seeking cooked products versus young technologies?
What percentage of Amrit's efforts?
I guess so. He's sort of saying here, he says so many companies seem focused on quick wins, which means cooked products. So I'm guessing he's asking
yeah. So that's, I haven't thought about it that way because we really look at it on a client-by-client basis, and for each client there's a mix of both, obviously, and anytime we can bring something that is a quick win and you can take it to market within a few months, it's a no-brainer. That's something that sales, marketing, finance, product development, everybody loves. But finding breakthrough products that are quick wins is not easy. It's certainly easier in global scouting than in domestic scouting because people have turned over all the rocks and stones within the Europe and North American markets. You can run into something overseas that is a real nugget that you could take to market. But typically there are still vendor qualification issues. There are regulatory issues or registration issues that slow you down a little bit. It's hard for me to put a number between the two. We devote equal energies to both, I would say, both finding quick wins and products as well as technologies and platforms. What we don't do as much is really blue sky kind of research. We've taken on a few initiatives where a client has asked us that, look, we just want to develop some competitive advantage over a 10-year period. And I must say that this has only happened for whatever reason with European companies. We've never been approached by an American company looking at a 10-year horizon. And in those cases, we've developed, we've been able to find partners that will essentially develop the precursors to technologies and do some pure research. Yeah, so we see a fairly wide spectrum. And I'm sorry, I can't put a more precise number on this.
Okay, here's a follow-up from Ruben. Do you see the new law in the USA, which takes effect in March, impacting open innovation? It is called the America Invents Act, and inventorship will now be based upon who files first.
Right. So most of you on the call might know that the rest of the world has always functioned for intellectual property on a first-to-file kind of rule. And the United States has been the oddball, really, because our laws have functioned on this basis of first to invent, so that keeping notebooks and logs about when you came up with an idea, becomes very important. And there's been a substantial change in the IP laws in the U.S. to bring them a little bit closer, not identical to global laws, where starting next year, as the questioner says, that the U.S. will also follow first to file. Now, I'm not an attorney, and I'm not an IP specialist, but I have listened to many presentations from IP attorneys on this very subject. And I think in the long run, this makes the process easier and more predictable for everybody, because the rules don't depend on which country the invention is happening in. So much of the work is being done by global teams now. Many American companies may have 3 people in Canada and 4 in Massachusetts working on a project, or people in France and Germany working on a project that will be delivered first in the United States, or vice versa. And so this idea where we had rules that were different from the rest of the world has always has more and more become a barrier. Now, there are people who argue that it's not a good thing that the law is changing. I not smart enough to say one way or the other. All I can say is that this is happening, and 4 or 5 years from now we'll look back and we'll think that things are working more smoothly. During the transition, there will be a number of hiccups going back and forth, where some companies will gain advantage and others will lose as a result of this transition. And again, that's something that an IP attorney can address far better than I can.
Okay, that's it on my end for questions.
Well, thank you very much, Lisa and Greg, and thanks to the audience. You've been a great audience, and I hope you got some value out of this. If you can bring up the last slide. If somebody was shy to ask a question on the webinar itself, you can email me directly. My email address is listed there, and I'd be delighted to take any questions privately.
All right, we have reached the end of our time today. Big thanks to Gunjan for his time and experience today explaining the ins and outs of global technology scouting. Please remember that we will be emailing to all of you a link to an online evaluation form for today's session. And we ask that you kindly forward that link to everyone from your group who participated in today's call. When you fill out the survey, at the end of that survey, you will be given a link to where you can download a copy of today's slide presentation, as well as access a recorded version of today's session that you can share with others. Again, much thanks to our speaker today and to each of you attending today's call. We hope to see you again at a future Management Roundtable event. Good afternoon, everyone, and have a great day.
Thank you.